The photograph begins in silence, the kind that settles just before something is remembered. Candlelight flickers somewhere beyond the frame, reflected faintly in glass, while ink dries slowly on a ledger resting inside the farmhouse. Outside, the land waits. Late autumn of 1905 has already taken what it needs from the soil. The wheat lies cut low, stubble pressed flat by cold winds, and the fields look tired, as if they have spent their last strength simply enduring. In front of the farmhouse, a family stands arranged with care, aware that this moment will outlast them. The camera is steady. The air is still. Nothing moves except the weight of time pressing inward. The father stands upright and firm, boots planted as if he is part of the ground itself. His posture speaks of ownership, not affection. This land belongs to him, and so does the quiet around. His name is Elias Moreland, though the photograph does not say so. Photographs rarely explain power. They simply display it. His coat is buttoned high, his jaw set, his eyes directed forward but not truly seeing the lens. He has learned to look past things, past people, past moments that might demand reflection. To his side sits Ruth, his wife, hands folded carefully in her lap. Her dress is plain, dark, and proper. Her face is calm, practiced in stillness. Her gaze does not meet the camera directly. It drifts just to the side, as though she is listening for something behind her, something she does not wish to hear again. Behind them stand 3 children placed with deliberate symmetry. They are clean, well-dressed, and unsmiling. In this era, smiles were not required for remembrance. Seriousness was mistaken for dignity. Their eyes are open, attentive, already learning how to hold themselves in silence. The image is sharp for its time, too sharp. Every line in the farmhouse boards shows clearly, each crack running like a thin scar across the wood. The house looks older than the family, older than the moment, as though it has watched many such gatherings and kept their secrets without complaint. At first glance, nothing appears wrong. This is what survival looked like in rural America at the turn of the century. Families documented proof that they endured another season, another winter, another year of labor that left the land poorer and the people hard. The photograph would serve as evidence. We were here, we held on, we belonged. The camera captured exactly what it was meant to capture, and yet it also captured what it was never supposed to see. Behind the family, where the farmhouse shadow stretches toward the tree line and the barn's edge dissolves into darkness, something interrupts the balance of the image. At first it seems like a trick of light, a blur caused by the long exposure. But the longer one looks, the less it behaves like a shadow. The shape stands too upright, too still. It is almost human in outline, not fully defined, yet unmistakable once noticed. It does not belong to the family, and it was not arranged by the photographer. It stands where no one was meant to stand. In 1905, photographs required patience. People held their breath. Animals were tied back. Nothing accidental was welcome. And yet this figure remains, caught between intention and chance, too deliberate to be ignored. Too quiet to be explained away easily. At the time, no one commented on it. The photograph was slipped into a ledger inside the farmhouse, placed between tax receipts and seed purchases. Its purpose was practical, not sentimental. There was no caption, no date written in the margin, no acknowledgement of the presence in the background. In that world, questions were luxuries, and landowners were rarely expected to answer them. What mattered was order. What mattered was that the books balanced, the fields produced, and the family remained respectable. The ledger closed. The house settled back into routine. Outside, the land accepted another winter, but photographs have a strange patience. They do not forget what people choose to overlook. Years later, when hands unfamiliar with the Moreland name would hold the image up to the light, the figure would reveal itself more clearly. But even in 1905, something about it resisted being ordinary. The shape does not look toward the camera. It does not share in the act of being recorded. Instead, it seems to watch the family. Its presence bends the image inward, shifting the focus away from the posed figures and toward the quiet space behind them. It is as if the photograph itself knows where the truth is standing. The longer the image is studied, the heavier it becomes. What first appeared as a simple family record begins to feel like a pause before a confession. The house no longer seems neutral. The land no longer looks merely tired. The silence thickens. One begins to notice Ruth's turned gaze more sharply, the children's rigid posture, the way Elias' hands are clenched just slightly as though holding on to something that cannot be seen. This was an era when absence was rarely explained. People came and went without ceremony, especially those whose names carried little weight. Farmhands, laborers, hired help. Their lives passed through places like Ashcombe County without leaving official marks. If someone disappeared, the land absorbed the gap and moved on. Memory adjusted itself around convenience. Respectability was preserved by omission. The photograph does not tell us who the figure is. It does not tell us why it stands there or how long it had been there before the shutter closed. It only tells us that it was present, that it existed at the exact moment the Moreland family chose to be remembered. This is what makes the image unsettling. Not that it suggests something supernatural, but that it refuses to let the past remain clean. The figure is not dramatic. It does not gesture or intrude. It simply stands silent as though waiting for acknowledgement that never came. In this way, the photograph becomes more than a record. It becomes a witness. Some images preserve joy. Others preserve achievement. This one preserves a tension that was never resolved. It holds the weight of something unspoken, something pushed to the edges of memory and left there. The family would go on with their lives. The ledger would fill with more entries. Seasons would pass. The house would age. But the photograph would remain unchanged, carrying within it the same quiet imbalance, the same unanswered presence. Once the figure is seen, it cannot be unseen. It alters the meaning of everything around it. The farmhouse becomes a place of withheld truths. The family's posture becomes a study in restraint. The land becomes a keeper of stories it did not ask to hold. This is how guilt often survives history, not through loud accusation but through still images that refuse to align with the story people told themselves. The photograph does not accuse Elias Moreland. It does not explain Ruth's silence. It does not speak for the children who learned early how to stand still. It only waits. Waiting is what it does best. It waits for someone to look closely enough, long enough, to feel the discomfort settle in their chest. It waits for the realization that some photographs do not exist to celebrate the past. They exist to preserve what the past tried to bury. And standing there just beyond the family's carefully arranged memory, the figure remains, watching, patient, unchanged, as if it knows that time will eventually turn its attention back to this moment. And when it does, the silence will finally begin to speak. Ashcombe County learned early how to survive without asking questions. It was a place shaped less by laws than by quiet understandings, agreements made without ink or witnesses, upheld by habit and fear rather than force. Men like Elias Moreland did not need to raise their voices to be obeyed. Ownership did the speaking for them. The land answered first, and the people followed. His farm spread wider than most, its fields stretching into low hills where fences leaned but never fell. Prosperity here did not arrive loudly. It settled in, slow and unquestioned, carried on the backs of those who were rarely named. Seasonal hands arrived in spring and left before winter. Tenants worked off debts that never quite shrank. Hired girls passed through the house like shadows, their labor noticed only when it stopped. Names were not written down. They did not need to be. Wages were delayed with familiar excuses. Promises softened into routine, and routine became a substitute for fairness. This was not cruelty in the dramatic sense. It was something quieter, more durable. It was how things had always been done, and that made it easier to defend. In the spring of 1904, Thomas Hale arrived with little more than a small bag and a willingness to work. He was young, though not careless. He spoke less than others and listened more. No one could later say exactly where he came from. That detail never seemed important at the time. What mattered was that he worked. He worked longer hours than the others, taking the early shifts and staying late after the light thinned. When winter came, he slept in the barn rather than the house, wrapped in feed sacks, breathing in dust and hay until his cough settled deep into his chest. He never complained. In places like Ashcombe County, silence was often mistaken for gratitude. The church ledger records his presence only once, a single Sunday. He stood at the back pew, hat in hand, eyes lowered, as though unsure whether he belonged inside the building at all. No one spoke to him afterward. No one needed to. His role was already understood. He was useful. That was the word Elias Moreland used when asked. Useful and nothing more. It was enough to explain his existence without granting him weight. Rumors, however, gave him weight whether anyone wanted it or not. They always did. In a community built on hierarchy, whispers traveled faster than truth, especially when they moved downward. Someone said Thomas had seen something he should not have. Someone else said he lingered too close to the house after dark. Another claimed he asked questions about the land, about boundaries, about promises made to others before him. None of it was confirmed. None of it needed to be. Suspicion did not require evidence here. It only required imbalance. Elias heard the whispers and did nothing. He did not defend Thomas, nor did he accuse him openly. Silence was easier. Silence kept the land orderly. When men like Elias chose not to speak, others learned quickly to do the same. By the summer of 1905, Thomas Hale was gone. There was no farewell, no settling of wages. His few belongings vanished from the barn without comment. When asked, the Morlings said he left for work farther west. It was a believable answer. People left all the time. The church ledger made no correction, no departure noted, no concern recorded. Life continued as if nothing had been removed. Fields were planted, meals were eaten, children grew, the farm carried on, and yet absences wait even when no one names it. The barn felt darker after that summer, as though light hesitated at the door. The children stopped playing near the tree line where Thomas once worked late into the evenings. They did not say why. They did not need to. Ruth began locking the doors before dusk, her movements careful, her eyes lingering on the windows longer than before. She never spoke of Thomas, not aloud. But silence has a sound when it grows heavy enough. It creaks through floorboards. It settles into beams. It clings to walls like cold. Whatever had happened did not announce itself. It did not demand attention. It simply stayed. The farm absorbed it the way land absorbs blood, pulling it down into layers where it cannot be seen but never fully disappears. Injustice rarely arrives as an event. It does not knock, it seeps. It disguises itself as normalcy, as routine, as the way things are done. It grows comfortable when left unchallenged. And in Ashcombe County, challenges were rare. Respectability depended on restraint, not reflection. The Morelands understood this well. When the photograph was taken that autumn, it captured more than a family at rest. It captured a moment after something had been removed, when the space left behind had not yet learned how to close. Thomas was already gone, but the land had not forgotten him. Neither had the house. The figure that would later draw attention stood there because absence sometimes demands shape. It presses against memory until it takes form. No one in 1905 would have called it injustice. That word was too large, too No letters, no recorded wages, no marked grave. That too was part of the system. People like Thomas were meant to pass through, not remain. Their labor was remembered long enough to be useful and forgotten as soon as it became inconvenient. Elias Moreland lived the rest of his life respected. His name appeared in records tied to land and taxes, not to people. Ruth aged quietly, her habits unchanged, her silences deepening. The children grew into roles shaped by what they learned not to ask. And Ashcombe County remained what it had always been, orderly, productive, quiet. But quiet places are rarely empty. They are filled with what was never resolved. The barn, the tree line, the farmhouse itself carried the weight of a story that had been pressed down and covered over. The photograph, tucked away and forgotten for years, held that weight without complaint. It did not accuse. It did not explain. It only remembered. This is how injustice survives history. Not through dramatic acts recorded in bold ink, but through ordinary days that refuse to acknowledge what they cost. When no one challenges it, injustice learns to stay. It learns how to blend in. It learns how to wait. And in Ashcombe County it waited quietly, patient as the land itself, knowing that one day someone would look closely enough to feel the imbalance, to sense the absence, and to wonder what kind of silence could swallow a man whole without leaving a mark. Decades passed the way they always do in places built on quiet agreements, not with announcement but with erosion. The farm changed hands once, then again, each sale stripping a little more memory from the soil. Names that once meant something were reduced to ink in courthouse ledgers, folded into wills that yellowed and cracked at the edges. The Moreland name survived only as a line item, a reference point for boundaries and taxes, not for people. Houses were repainted. Fences were moved. Trees grew thick where fields once lay open. By the time the Second World War ended, Ashcombe County had learned how to forget with efficiency. It was not until 1948, when a local historian named Alina Price began cataloging early county photographs, that the image returned to the light. She worked in a room that smelled of dust and paste, sleeves rolled up, hands careful. The photograph was thin, its edges softened by years of handling. At first it looked like dozens of others, a family, a farmhouse. A moment preserved to prove survival. Alina held it at arm's length, then closer still, adjusting the lamp until the glass caught the light just right. She was not searching for scandal. She was searching for context. And that was when the background resisted her assumptions. Enlarged for clarity, the shadow behind the family did not dissolve the way shadows should. It sharpened. The outline became human. A man stood there, bareheaded, shoulders squared, posture rigid, as if he had been told to hold still and obey. His clothing was worn in the way work wears cloth, thin, not pressed or ceremonial. It was not Sunday best. It was labor. Most unsettling of all were his eyes. They were open, wide enough to be noticed even in grain and blur. They did not look toward the camera, toward the act of being recorded. They fixed themselves on the house, on the family standing between him and whatever waited behind that door. Alina felt the room grow quieter. She checked the back of the photograph for notes. There were none. She searched for other images taken that day. None existed. The family's names appeared in tax records, land deeds, and church donations. The figure did not. That absence drew her attention deeper into the archives. Church records were brought out, their pages brittle and faint. She traced the names of farmhands and tenants with her finger, following the rhythm of arrivals and departures that marked rural life. Then she found it. A marginal note, barely legible, squeezed between entries as though it had not been meant to remain. Thomas Hale. Last seen autumn 1905. No burial entry followed, no departure noted, no explanation offered, just an ending without closure. The ledger moved on as if nothing had been interrupted. Alina closed the book slowly. She had learned that the most telling details were often the ones written smallest, pushed to the edges of the page. She returned to the photograph, studying the man's posture again. He did not appear surprised. He did not appear defiant. He appeared resigned, as if this moment had been expected, as if the camera had arrived late, catching only the aftermath of a decision already made. The farmhouse in the image seemed to lean inward now, its dark doorway heavier than before. Alina requested permission to examine the house itself, now abandoned and owned by the county. It stood quiet, its windows dulled by years of dust. Inside, the air held the scent of old wood and damp paper. Floors creaked under careful steps. In the master bedroom, she noticed a dresser with a drawer that resisted being pulled. Behind it, tucked into a false space, lay a folded letter. The paper was thin, the ink faded but legible. The handwriting was careful, restrained, the kind that measured each word before allowing it to exist. Ruth Moreland had written it. Alina recognized the name immediately. The letter did not begin with a greeting. It did not ask forgiveness. It spoke of fear, of a night when Elias insisted on silence, of a sound outside the house that did not belong to the wind, of something done quickly, without prayer, without witness. She wrote of the ground being soft near the roots, of how the earth would hold if pressed down hard enough. She did not name Thomas Hale. She did not need to. The truth pressed through the careful phrasing like breath through cloth. It was a confession written too late, hidden where it could not accuse while the accused still lived. Alina sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house settle around her. She imagined the night Ruth described, the weight of obedience. The choice to stay quiet because staying quiet had always kept the world in order. She returned to the photograph once more, now unable to see it as a simple record. It had captured what people refused to acknowledge, not a ghost, a witness, the last moment before erasure. The land had kept the secret because land always does. It absorbs, it covers, it waits. But the lens had not forgotten. It had done what it was meant to do, even if no one realized it at the time. It had recorded presence without permission. It had preserved the evidence of a life made inconvenient. Alina documented her findings with care. She wrote without accusation, letting the materials speak. The photograph, the ledger, the letter, together they formed a story that had never been told aloud. When the county reviewed her report, there was discomfort, then hesitation, then silence. No charges were filed. Too much time had passed. Names had already been carved into stone. But something had shifted. The photograph was no longer stored away. It was displayed unaltered, its background left intact. Visitors paused before it longer than they intended. Some noticed the figure immediately. Others felt unsettled without knowing why. The house was not reopened. The land remained unused. People said it felt heavy. Alina returned once more before leaving Ashcombe County for good. She stood before the photograph and felt the patience in it, the quiet endurance of being seen too late but not erased entirely. History does not always correct itself. Sometimes it only reveals what it allowed. The photograph had waited, patient, unforgiving, And now that it had spoken, even without words, the silence around it felt different, heavier, as if the past had finally exhaled, leaving behind a truth that would not move again, no matter how many years passed. The excavation began without ceremony, the way most reckonings do. There were no crowds, no raised voices, only the dull sound of shovels breaking soil that had not been disturbed in decades. Beneath the old tree line where roots had grown thick and patient, the ground resisted at first, as if reluctant to give up what it had been asked to hold. When the earth finally yielded, it did so unevenly. Bones appeared not in careful order, not placed with prayer or marker, but aligned by haste. Limbs drawn in, soil packed tight. The coroner would later say the position suggested urgency, not mercy. This was not burial as farewell, it was burial as solution. The confirmation came quietly, spoken in measured tones that carried more weight than accusation. Thomas Hale had never left. He had been made to disappear so others could remain comfortable. History had avoided the truth, but the ground had not. Once disturbed, it offered no argument, only evidence. There were no charges filed. No court date set. Time had already delivered its sentence, the kind that spares the living and binds the dead. Elias Moreland had been gone for years, his name etched neatly into a family plot that bore no sign of controversy. He had died respected, remembered as a landowner, a contributor, a man of standing. Yet respect, once questioned, does not survive intact. It thins, it fades, it becomes conditional. People began to look at the Moreland name differently, not with outrage, but with a quiet recalibration. Stories were adjusted, praise softened, silence took on new meaning. The farmhouse was abandoned soon after, not by order, but by reluctance. No one wanted to be the last to leave or the first to return. Windows clouded over, paint peeled, the porch sagged under its own weight. Locals said the land felt unsettled, as if something unfinished still lingered there, pressing against the air. It was not fear they described, but discomfort, the kind that follows when a place is finally understood. The photograph was placed in the county archive without embellishment. No dramatic caption, no interpretive plaque. It did not need explanation, it needed only to be seen. Visitors often paused longer than expected. Some felt unease without knowing why. They shifted their weight. They leaned closer. They stepped back again. Others noticed the figure immediately and said nothing, as if speaking would break something fragile. The image did not change. It did not respond. It endured. Truth does not demand recognition. It does not announce itself or ask permission. It waits. History has a long memory. It remembers what people bury, what records omit, and what silence tries to erase. It remembers not to punish, but to preserve. The remains were reinterred with care this time, marked properly, named correctly. There was no crowd, only a few witnesses who stood quietly and let the moment pass without performance. The bell from the nearby church rang once, not in ceremony, but in acknowledgement. It was enough. The dead do not always need vengeance. Sometimes they only need to be seen, to have their presence affirmed after years of denial. When the truth was finally spoken aloud, even decades later, the past seemed to loosen its grip. Not forgiven, not forgotten, but allowed to rest. The land did not change overnight. It did not become lighter or kinder, but it felt honest, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. Some names only find peace when the truth is spoken aloud, and some photographs exist solely to make sure it is.